responsibility shifts, it's all CCO, and that's how we operate from now on, subject to whatever commercial arrangements we may put in place if we were to proceed. So that's number one. The objectives of the water CCO at the moment are not in alignment necessarily fully with what the LGA says, particularly around that long-term benefit to community, and making sure we are delivering to support community growth and the social aspects of that as well. So making sure that we've got real clear alignment with what council's objectives and operating mode are, and also making sure that a water CCO, while it has a different operating model, is aligned with the same objectives that council itself has. So if we move through, so there are, when we come to it again, so if we come specifically down, if your water CCO is not, at the moment, the way the legislation is drafted, if your water CCO were not to be set up by the time this bill came into effect, the Preliminary Arrangement Act says we consult on an in-house model and a preferred option. 2 options, we are not required to consult on every option that is possible, reasonably possible. The Bill 3 contemplates that you would actually potentially need to go back and consult again on 3 options if you have not yet already established your CCO that you consulted on the first time. Now, we do not believe that it is an intentional, and that is directed potentially at driving toward where it might be desirable that councils go in terms of making sure we are considering joint CCOs. For us, that's not a problem. We've done this. We've looked at the CCO option. We've canvassed our options. Other councils are still in the planning phases around this, but that would trip us up in that we would potentially have to go back and consult again, which provides greater uncertainty for our community going forward. There are other things around ability to pay down debt. There's a lot of technical things. The CCO needs the ability to be able to use water charges to pay down debt for financial sustainability, which is by 2028, which is one of the key aims of the bill. There's decision making that around change proposals, which we would like to be, it's not as nimble as what the structure, it's a decision making framework, it's not as nimble as what the structure would have been anticipated had it coming out of the PA Act. So I think again it's starting to put that lens on how does a CCO need to operate differently than how services within a council would operate, and does this bill give effect to that? And then particularly as well, again, coming into what is the impact on this on a long-term plan? Do we need, we will need to do some form of probably amendment to our long-term plan. It's not required that we consult on it. But then starting to work through what does that actually look like, and the bill's not quite clear on that yet. So that's really important from an SDC rather than a CCO perspective, that we get really clear on what that means for us. It's probably...
Thank you. And I think we just remember the context that all this has come at us from is in the last 12 months, the previous reform was taken away, and then these different actions were put in place over the last 12 months for us to get to where we are now. Often written in parallel, and the sequencing has meant that some of the anomalies that Julie has raised need to be clarified, and that's the position of this paper, trying to do that. Any questions, thoughts, comments from Malcolm?
Yeah, it would appear that the bill has been written in haste, as I think we're pretty well aware, and the double ups and things that you've exposed within it. I look at our submission and I think, well, we've just edited the bill for them. Perhaps we can send them a bill for editing. I'd just like to say, great submission. I have great confidence in it. Very clear,
Thank you.
And it seems to have gathered the areas that we need. And I do hope, and I do see in the way it's been written, that I hope it gets received in such a way that they take upon the changes, because you've delivered them in a way which are very easy to accept. So well done, thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Sophie.
Yeah, thank you very much. Somebody yesterday at a different council referenced a movie. It's a Wallace and Gromit movie. The bit where Gromit is on a small train trying to lay the tracks ahead so that the train doesn't derail. And I think that's a really good analogy for where we're at with some of these things. Like, you're literally trying to keep up by building the track while you're moving at speed. So thank you very much for your work trying to keep up with all of that. And I just felt the need to repeat that analogy because it's so good. But I sent an email not very long ago because I was trying to get my thoughts straight in my head. And I think this is a great submission, but I think there's some, and I appreciate that we're trying to focus mostly on how this would impact things like LTP, finances, and CCO. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff in that bill, in that very, very long bill that amends several different acts that long term is going to have a huge impact as far as how it's going to impact the environment and also some of our communities that aren't necessarily captured by a CCO, the one, you know, in terms of what they're calling domestic self-suppliers and that sort of thing. And we haven't got any of that in our submission, but they are still our people, and that is still our whenua, for the want of a better word. And I feel like it's important to include that, so I don't know, I'm just going to quickly run through some of the suggestions or the bits that I pointed out in my wee email, which I didn't share with everybody who, as it turns out, is in the room. We have got mention of the part around where they mentioned, you know, the lack of work and collaboration with Mana Whenua on this bill. There's a couple of sections where, you know, if we're thinking in terms of legislation, there is phrasing in the RMA that could be used to say that they actually, that, you know, must take into account relevant planning documents recognised by an iwi authority rather than must consider. You know, at the moment, it basically treats relationships with Mana Whenua like it's a contract, or like the only thing that you have to consider, which doesn't actually mean that you have to do anything, just means you've got to look at it, is a treaty settlement. And our local treaty settlement is 30 years old. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was not anticipated necessarily in that treaty settlement, but this is suggesting that you don't actually have to go much further than what was written in that act. The other parts is around things like catchment plans, because we don't control what goes in, what trickles down into our aquifer. I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to write a drinking water catchment management plan when we can't actually control the quality of the water or even have any impact on the quality of what goes into that water over the next 30 odd years. Same with the rivers. Our water is all from aquifers and rivers. We can control the depth of our own wells and the positioning of our intakes, but people who are on their own supplies, you know, that's limited by your purse. And then the stuff that, the clauses that amend the RMA, Taumata Arawa's operating principles and the Water Services Act, effectively what that does is it repeals Te Mana o Te Wai, which we know that was signalled by the government, and you know, that's what they said they would do. But what it also does is gives the Water Services Authority, which is an appointed board basically, the authority to set environmental performance standards for wastewater and stormwater, which then get set above national environmental standards and national policy statements, which means that they basically get, and that covers not just water, it covers discharges to air, water or land, biosolids and other byproducts, energy use, and waste introduced by a third party, for instance, trade waste. If that was below national environmental standards, I wouldn't be so alarmed, but it's not. It literally says that they can come in over above everything, and we can't make our bylaws or our water services entity water services CCO work harder for the environment than that. And I find that quite alarming. That's going to be long term, that's going to have a massive impact.
Thanks, Sophie. Julie, do you want to respond to any of those points? And is there ways that some of that can fit in with what you're talking about, or how do you think we deal with that?
If it's the wish of council, we can strengthen some wording around the mana whenua relationships. We have attempted to put that in there, but I guess what I'm hearing is it's not coming through strong enough. So we can attempt to so you can put some extra language in there, and that comes to part of what the request today is, to allow us to make some amendments to give effect to these post endorsement. In terms of the water standards and their interrelationship, the bill's impact is restricted to how the delivery of drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater operates within a wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater system. So in terms of how that impacts on things outside that system in terms of planning, etc., this bill, it's outside the ambit of this bill, so everything else still sits beside it. Does that answer a question, or has that missed the point slightly?
It's more that there's literally a clause that says that these performance standards will sit above national direction. So they're not outside it, they're above it.
That will all sit within the context of only for the systems that operate and are governed by this bill. But I can take that away and have another look at that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep going, but I would appreciate that, just because water is, we know from our own, we just adopted a one water strategy. It doesn't sit in isolation. The water will still go somewhere. It will end up into Waihora, it will go into the lake, it will into the rivers, it'll go into our groundwater. And that's where we then drink from again. So I get what you're saying, that it's trying to do that, but without having any real environmental flip back in the bill. It's basically saying that we're pretending that humans manage everything and we don't.
Cool, thank you, Sophie. And if that, Bob, you're up next. And if you want to comment on anything Sophie's raised as well, just so we get a feeling from people about whether and how much extra work we want Julie to do between it being drafted as what we have now and being submitted would be helpful too.
Yeah, no, mine's a bit different. Just concerned about staff and such like. Seeing we're going at the pace we are, I hope that the council has some idea, or they will have some idea, of how many staff we're going to lose, and will the staff be given long enough to actually make decisions and all those types of things, because I think to carry this forward, that's going to be a big part of it. And the other thing is where they're going to be based.
Tim or Sharon, do you want to touch on that?
Thanks, Bob. Look, there's no intent to lose any staff at this stage.
Meaning lose them, but a changeover from one organisation.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we're currently working with Murray and the establishment team to understand what that looks like. So there's still a consultation to come with all staff members, but we're pretty early stages in regard to identifying that. But yeah, there'll be consultation and there'll be plenty of time to do that.
I guess too, with that, we want to be prepared for the two outcomes that we're consulting on and not preempting one or the other and putting in a whole lot of work that may or may not be required based on that consultation. So you're preparing yourselves in the organisation for both outcomes without going too deep into spending money and time on something that might not be needed post 2nd of April. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Bob, did you have anything else? Okay. Lydia.
This is a pretty amazing submission. I think, you can see the work that's gone into this. And I think that potentially, I know Sophie sent an email a bit earlier, but I haven't actually had a chance to read it properly. There's a bit of detail in that. I want to understand a little bit around the dividend aspect in here. So my thoughts in the bill was that it was limiting dividends. So in my view, I see dividends as being paid back to council if it's a CCO. Is that correct?
So it's unclear. So it anticipates there could be a dividend paid back to council. That is something that under the current legislation would be determined between the board and council via a statement of expectations. The other options on what can happen with surplus are, instead of paying a dividend, reinvestment back into the infrastructure, rather than drawing debt to fund the long-term investment of the infrastructure that may otherwise have to be funded via different revenue raising schemes. So the bill opens a pathway for a dividend. It does not require a dividend, and then it's just a matter for council, for the CCO board and council to decide what the pathway is on that in the future.
I guess I just have some concerns around dividend and value for money for our ratepayers and our people, that actually that type of business I see shouldn't actually be making a dividend to pay out. If anything, it's reinvestment or debt servicing. So I don't know whether there needs to be some different wording or just some more clarity on that. Like you've really touched on that a little bit. But and then the other thing I just wanted to understand, in Bill 3, are there any roadblocks around if we choose to retain water in-house but ring-fenced?
That is an in-house service delivery option, which is one of the two options that will be consulted on and come to you on 2nd April. So I think the answer is no.
Thanks, Lydia. Malcolm.
Yes, I'd just like to support Sophie's point about how she had read just where things sit at 4 and above in national standards. It'd be good to get some clarification, because I was in a meeting with Minister Brown last year where he indicated that they were going to get rid of Te Mata Wai and they were going to dumb down discharge registrations. You better discharge into different forms of water, whether they were soft flowing, fast flowing, sea, lake, whatever. So is this how they're heading and trying to hedge it into this bill? I'd just be very interested to know, because the public should know.
That might be a question that I need to take away and talk to our external legal advisors on, if that's okay.
Well, it's I don't know, has the rest of the meeting fit, but I mean, Sophie's point was good. We just need to know what we're dealing with. I don't expect it to take a long time or cost a lot of money.
No, and I see what Sophie's raised to fit under point 2 of today's recommendation, minor amendments. I'm not feeling like there's anything contentious in what Sophie's raised. She's raising the clarification around where the bill intends to go, and if councillors here are happy to approve the 3 points, the draft as it is, some minor amendments, including some of the things Sophie's raised, with Julie, your oversight as to how that might best fit into it. And I'll speak to the presentation to the Select Committee when it comes up with some staff support. Everyone, you happy to move that, Malcolm? Yep. Sophie, okay with that? Is a way to deal with your questions? Okay. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this paper? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you, Julie. Now we're on page 30, and this is the consultation. Sarah, note that you're online. Thanks for zooming in.
Hi. Good afternoon. It's morning still here, but thanks for your time this afternoon. As per the report, which I'm also taking as read, we're seeking from this subcommittee the endorsement for council for adoption of the consultation document, and also with the authorisation for Sharon, the CEO, to make any necessary minor changes prior to the public release, and also to endorse the process for public consultation between the 20th of February, and the 12th of March. In terms of a summary of this proposal, it's set out on page 5 of the consultation document. We're consulting to establish a water services council-controlled organisation for the management and delivery of drinking and wastewater, and to keep stormwater in-house. As Julie's mentioned earlier, we're just going out on the one consultation option in the proposal, and then we are also detailing further information around the options, which include the status, what is being referred to as the status quo, which is in pages 8 to 14 of the document. So working backwards from the 1st of July date for the potential creation of a CCO has meant public consultation needs to start next week. So this is down for Thursday, the 20th of February, and will run for 3 weeks through until Thursday, the 12th of March. The main tagline for consultation is anticipated to be Your Water Done Well, and will contain a combination of icons and imagery of our water assets and how people in the district use water. We'll take a similar approach to this consultation as we did for representation review consultation, to ensure that the district is covered in terms of people having access to this, and we're meeting with people where they are with stations at facilities, as we have done previously. There will also be traditional consultation tools employed, such as newspaper advertising, and again, that signage at the facilities. Digital campaign wise, we're using our owned channels, especially Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as some paid digital dedicated web content, and also using our website to drive traffic to the digital consultation space, which will be set up in a very similar way to representation review and also long-term plan. We will also be communicating directly with local business, and engagement with mana whenua is ongoing within the specific consultation process and more broadly in the potential establishment of the CCO. We do expect some feedback from our community regarding the impact on rates, and while we plan for this, there will be a level of agility required as we work through what that community feedback is. So in conclusion of consultation will be council hearings on the 20th of March, followed by deliberations on the 26th, and it's anticipated a final decision will be made on the 2nd of April. I guess now would be a good time if there are any questions with regards to the consultation document and or the consultation activity approach. I do have my colleagues from Finance and Legal here to assist as well, because there's a lot of information contained within the document.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Was there anything else staff wanted to say to introduce this document?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think it's really important to just give a little bit of background from where we have come from, and I'm going to ask Murray England to just talk a little bit about over the years, how water has been dealt with in the Selwyn District, and how Selwyn District continues to be a future-focused organisation. And, just bring back to the reminder that we've had a number of PwC workshops. We've had some really good hearty discussion over the past 6 months around, ideal what is fit for future for Selwyn to continue to support growth and be fit for purpose, and affordability in the long run for our community. So I would like at the very least the opportunity for Murray to just speak a little bit, and then I'll ask Alison to chime in from a financial, and Julie, so that we give you the backstory that may enable just some additional questions from you. Murray.
Awesome, thank you, Sharon. I guess this is a trip down memory lane for a lot of us, and I've got a few little notes here to talk to, but it all sort of started back 2015 in the long-term plan, where council moved towards a district-wide rate for urban water and also for wastewater. So that was a big move from having individual rates. Some schemes had large cost increase predicted over that 10 years, and council made the bold decision to harmonise those rates and come across to a district-wide rate. Subsequent next year, council then moved the rural water supplies into that same district rate, and in 2017 the stormwater systems also moved into a district-wide approach. So this was council's approach to making sure that water services were affordable for all of their communities. But there's been many other big, bold decisions that council has made over the years, so moving from annual charges to volumetric charges for all on-demand supplies. One of the first councils in Canterbury to do that. The first council to move towards UV treating of all supplies. Canterbury's relied on secure groundwater for many years, and Selwyn was one of the first councils to see that groundwater patterns had changed and that we needed to move to provide UV treatment. Also one of the first councils to move towards providing viral inactivation for water supplies, so that's not yet required in the drinking water standards, but we have provided that service for Kai Huts, Giles Road and Southbridge. If you remember, we were the first council to provide a chlorine-free exemption for one of our supplies. That's Kai Huts, and the exemption itself is not necessarily important. What is important is the fact that council showed that it had the systems, processes, level of expertise that Taumata Aro was able to grant that exemption to council. There's been other bold and rapid decisions that council has made over the years, linking Springfield to the Sheffield supply. If you remember, the Springfield supply had a number of issues during heavy rainfall events. Council authorised the funding and the direction for council staff to install that pipeline, which would have happened within 12 months. So that's a huge piece of infrastructure to allow resilience for our communities. We've aggressively invested in Three Waters over the years. We've enabled growth, and I think one of the highlights recently has been that One Water strategy, which was mentioned earlier on in this meeting. This was a co-design process which was quite unique in the New Zealand environment, where we started with a blank piece of paper and we sat down with our iwi partners and worked through what that One Water strategy would look like for Selwyn, which is amazing. There's a lot of stuff about water, but also wastewater. The bold decision to connect Darfield and Kui to the centralised treatment system, and recently the Ellesmere to Pines pipeline, which is currently under construction and not too far away from commissioning, which is exciting. So that's a bit of an overview of all the big bold decisions that council has made to date, and obviously there's some bold decisions that need to be made coming forward too.
Cool, thank you, Murray. Alison, do you want to talk about the dollars?
Yep, thanks, Sam. I think it's just worth just sort of starting with what our baseline costs have been to get to the modelling. So we have used the financials that were part of our long-term plan. And I think within that it's worth just noting that those numbers would undoubtedly change because we will be moving into a more regulated environment. So the baseline numbers would change. What we've added within our long-term plan numbers is the projected operating costs that we believe are required to operate the CCO. That obviously has an impact onto the rates, which undoubtedly are higher. But over a period of time, when we look at the population growth and we look at the 10-year point, those numbers do start to come down again. That's a very high level on the numbers. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And Julie?
Hi, I think I've largely covered this for you guys under the submission, so I'll keep it brief. So the preliminary act sets out the arrangements on what we're required to consult on. Now, what we are consulting on is an in-house delivery model, which is one of the required options of consult, and your preferred option, which was the standalone CCO. The Act is very prescriptive on what must go into the consultation document, and that is a lot around modelling impact on, as Alison said, impact on rates, impact on debt, to allow the person in our community sitting at home to accessibly understand what are the impact on these options for me going forward. So if there's a bit more detail or things look a little bit different than what we would normally see in one of our consultation documents, it's because it is meeting a very specific set of regulatory standards on the way we consult here that is different to our normal LGA type environment. We also have tried to write this consultation document bearing in mind Bill 3, yet while not yet law, we have an indication of what may come for that. So we've looked to future-proof our consultation as well to make sure that our community are fully over everything that they would need to understand if we move forward with this model. And I think Alison's already touched on it. Because the bill is very prescriptive around the financial modelling we need to put in there, we've had to put some numbers in around LTP. But that is not what in-house would look like going forward. That is to meet the regulatory standard that we've been required to do for the consultation.
Thank you. Are there any other staff that think they've got some background that would be helpful for us and answer questions ahead of us asking them? Alison, did you have something else?
I just wanted to add as well, obviously our long-term plan is based on the LGFA funding limits of 280%. The modelling for proposed water CCO is based on that 500%. There is a graph within the document that shows what our debt limits and headroom would be.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for the work that's gone into this. And like you said, Julie, it's new for us to consult in this way. It's not following our normal way of doing things. So Sarah, thanks for working with the team to provide this clarity. Keen to hear people's views around the room about where it sits. And one of the things that's come up in almost everyone's presentation today and around our language, status quo isn't an option, so we need to delete that from our language because there's no option to stay there. And even within this document, we've talked about comparing the two options, and one sort of says a new council-controlled organisation, and the other says council-delivered services. Actually, it's going to be a new enhanced council-delivered services to meet the regulation and the compliance that's going to be required from the Commerce Commission. So even that language, I think we just need both options are new, and think about how we can help the community understand that it's not just carry on as we were, or move to something that's different. Malcolm.
Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate you on the document, on the consultation document. I think it does a great job of explaining why we're doing this, where we're at as a council. So although I do have knowledge, I read it, tried to read it through the eyes of a ratepayer, and I think it does a really good job of explaining why, the whys of why we have to do this and the hows. So well done on the way you put it together.
Thank you, Malcolm. I just wonder on the numbers that are in the document, it seems really clear that years 1, 2 and 3 are going to be cheaper if it was in-house, and then more expensive in over 10 years. And if we move to an external model, it's going to look more expensive early on, and then that will be deleted by year 10 and be much cheaper for our communities from, we can't see from this, but it might be from year 7, 8, 9 or 10, but somewhere by year 10 it's cheaper. Have we used the same kind of risk analysis around those numbers for both the in-house and the CCO model, or is one slightly more conservative than the other, and we've kind of couched some of the numbers in one of the models in a different way than the other, or have we dealt with both sets of numbers equally?
I think, Mina, our baseline has always been our long-term plan. We have not modelled what an in-house with additional regulatory changes would be, because we don't really know what that's going to look like yet. So this is based on what a CCO would look like if that was established. And the reason it's sort of dropping off is that overlay of growth that we expect to come through.
So is there a way, like we don't want to be guessing, and we don't want to be throwing numbers at our community that we don't believe could be true, but it feels like if we know these numbers are low and we're aware of that, then we should be clear about that with the community on that one model, so that they actually do see. I mean, I'd hate to be for us as a council in a position where we go, this is the cheapest model, we go with the cheapest model next year, and then we get to our next long-term plan, and actually the numbers are the same as or worse than the CCO being set up, but we just hadn't done that analysis or hadn't been clear with the community on that. So I think there's quite a risk in that for us. So I think somehow, even if the numbers were grey or highlighted the uncertainty that sits around them, it might be quite helpful just to de-risk this consultation by having a number plus a 10% margin, or put in whatever margin you think is likely, and be transparent about that it's likely, not certain, to kind of help the community make an informed decision. Because at the moment, when I read this, if I'm worried about what I'm going to pay next year, there's a clear option for me. If I'm worried about what my family's going to pay in 10 years' time, there's a reasonably clear option for me. But the numbers that I'm presented with don't necessarily provide the full story. So I don't know. I'll be interested how others feel about how we do that, but I just think there's a comms piece in this, so that our next long-term plan doesn't get too bad. We've got Sarah online and Alison as well to talk to that.
Yeah, I think, Sam, just to add to that, we can factor within the numbers, we can put a sensitivity analysis on it. So if our costs were to change, say plus or minus 10%, we can go back and add that in. We've not added it just now, but that's an easy amendment to make.
Thank you. And Sarah?
I guess my question would be we can put more, I guess, underneath those specific tables as well around, I guess, some of the caveats around the numbers also, which could help to strengthen that perspective in terms of, the numbers are not as set in stone because we don't know if we're setting up a CCO.
Yeah, and that's helpful, Sarah. I just think when someone looks at this, they'll go straight for the table with the numbers and read the number and read the percentage, and that's the key part. So if we're more uncertain about one of the numbers than the other, we should be clear about that on the table. Anyway, I appreciate both those answers, and it sounds like we might be able to deal with some sensitivity in there as well. Next up is Lydia.
I agree with you, Sam, on the status quo language, and that it isn't status quo. So we need to be very clear with our community that there are going to be changes in-house. So that would be fantastic. Some questions that have come at me lately is around LGFA borrowing and the terms and conditions on that. So I wonder whether there is a way to link in supplementary information to that so that people can understand what that funding is, because that's where the funding's going to come from, the 500% more than revenue. And the other question that I had on there is, do you have to complete a registration to do this submission? I know that we've had lots of chat in our community recently around a current consultation that's out that you have to register and have an account with Selwyn to be able to complete an online registration. And I know that we did change that through the representation review to not have that process there for people as a roadblock. And I agree on the numbers, because you're right, people are just going to look at those numbers and go, well, why? So I think there might just need to be some more prescriptive information around that.
Tim or Alison, do you guys want to talk to some of those things Lydia's raised?
Yeah, I think, Lydia, just on your first point, we can add narrative into the document that talks about what that funding source will look like. It doesn't need to be a lengthy narrative. It can be quite short and succinct, but we'll add that in.
LGFA?
Yeah, not LGFA, but Lydia, I think from an infrastructure perspective, the major benefit, when you talk about the why, the major benefit for infrastructure for the proposed model is the ability to borrow more, obviously. If you look at what we're currently doing, we're heavily leveraged towards our water investment. And we're right up against that debt ceiling, and the team have done a really good job at identifying the projects that support growth. But there's way more investment that's required. What the proposed model does is enables that additional borrowing, which supports that investment and that ongoing growth. And I'll give you an example. So we've got some commercial enterprises here at the moment that require a trade waste solution. We've got businesses that want to come here but can't because we don't have an effective trade waste solution. But that's expensive, and under the current financial modelling, we'd really struggle to provide that. But when you look at the proposed new model, you can see how we could potentially do that. So there's lots of wise answers to those. I guess it's how we communicate that.
And I guess with the LGFA as well, they have looked at lifting the overall borrowing rate for growth councils from the 200s to 350%, but they haven't done that for the water services entities that might be set up for growth councils. So we're having conversations with LGFA, preliminary conversations, to say, should that number be 6 or 7 or 800% rather than the 500% for high growth councils, to enable the sorts of investment that Tim's talking about. So it's early stages again, but we want to explore what that could look like, because our context isn't the same as just saying 500% will be fine forever. Did you have anything else, Lydia?
It was just an answer on the, do you have to register to complete the submission?
Yeah, if I can answer that perhaps, I'll work with Sarah to make sure that they don't have to register. We're able to do that for the representation review, so we'll make sure that it also applies to this process.
Cool, thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, thank you. And on that note, even if they're not registering, it would be interesting to note. So, for instance, on page 14, there's the different types of household, like people who receive drinking water and sewerage, some who are on restricted supply, and that's it, that sort of thing. It would be interesting to know where they fall on that, or maybe that's just me being geeky about wanting to know who is, you know, sees this as good or bad or what their comments are. But I don't know if we can do that. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody involved. This has been a really long conversation between government and councils and backwards and forwards since Havelock North. Maybe this time it'll actually go through, who knows. And trying to fit all of that into, when you take out the cover pages and everything else, about 10 pages worth of content. That's actually really hard to condense it in that, but we also know that you throw a 50-page document at people and they will not read it. So this is where we're at. Great. Just wondering whether on page 12, because we've got a graph that shows what the projected water services CCO would be doing, but we don't have anything to compare it with. We're consulting on two different options. We've got one graph. We probably need to illustrate what the difference is in that, and I know it would be quite different and I have no idea where you'd fit it. But I'm just saying, if we're consulting on two, it feels like we are leading people towards one, and I don't really want to do that. On page 13, the tables are interesting, and I think a few eyes are going to glaze over with them, but you know, it's interesting for those who want to read it. But when it says this table reflects, for a couple of them, it's quite hard to know whether that's, is this table referring to the table above or below? Because there's two of those this tables, but there are three tables. I don't know whether maybe just drawing a line around the table to include the text that's relevant would be helpful on that count. That's just a design thing. And I agree around page 14 with those different lines around LTP. Does that include the extra costs of compliance and regulation, everything, which we don't necessarily know? So yes, definitely support putting something in there. I don't know whether we can do it in like little boxes of important things to remember when you're reading this table, like, but I know we're going to get an awful lot of questions, and there's going to be an awful lot of people who, no matter how many times you explain why we're doing this, they'll be like, but why? We don't want it, can't do it, but it's going to happen anyway, which is, this is the thing. But yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Were there any particular answers to those? Sarah, you were nodding away to some of the table stuff.
Yeah, so I believe we've referred to the compliance costs not being included, but we can definitely make it clearer in terms of what text is referring to what table within the document.
And the numbers are on the second table itself. Alison, is that something that we have? Can we compare the in-house versus the WCCO model with tables that look the same?
The graph on page
Oh, the
12.
graph, sorry, yeah.
We would need to be making assumptions and being very clear on the assumptions that we're adding, because the additional regulatory cost, we're unclear on what that would look like. So I think we can add, for sure, we can add an additional table in there, but it's going to be very heavily caveated with some narrative.
Okay. And the tables, just coming back to the rating examples that we talked about, is having the LTP in there the right number to compare, because the LTP number isn't going to be the number that we end up under either model. And so should we just call that enhanced in-house delivery bill, or whatever we're going to call that piece, and then just compare the two to one another? It kind of feels like we're comparing to something that's not going to exist anymore when we say the LTP, and I feel like we can be clearer with our community around that. And if we keep referring to it in these tables, it's kind of saying, oh, but the LTP is still an option, whereas we're going to keep going up from that.
I think you're right, Sam. It's something we've discussed extensively with Simpson Gresson on the external advisory, which is the model that has been set up, and DIA acknowledge this themselves, around comparing to an in-house model it's a very imperfect way to consult, and it's a matter of how do we thread that needle that gives our community it makes it clear that, as you say, status quo is not what is in existence, and it's not the expectation DIA nor the legislation that we consult in a manner that says this is what it would look like under an enhanced model. It's LTP plus some is how it's kind of anticipated the legislation would work, because we can absolutely do a little bit more, but we want to be really clear from setting a scene for our ratepayers that says, as you say, that it's not right, because the assumptions that go into it are wrong, because it then undermines our whole consultation and the way we have informed the community.
And so the number has got pick a number, 7% or something on top of it, and then we're just really clear that it's got that it's LTP plus 7% to allow for the uncertainty, or just something that sits, then that might be able to cover it.
Yep, that's fine. We will go away and look at how we can make that work. We may not be able to get into some of the level of detail within the tables that are there, because there's quite an extensive amount of modelling that sits behind that. So these tables might look slightly different if we're putting long-term plan plus, to quote Julie, long-term plan plus into the mix.
Okay. Cool. And there's one other thing that has come up around competing funding, and it's on page 11 of the document, 44 of the agenda, on the page that starts council delivered services, and the last bullet point just says competing funding. Water is only one factor in council decision making and investment. Water priorities can lose out to transport or solid waste investment, and that statement isn't to suggest that council currently spends its money that it collects for water on anything else, but it's to say that whenever council is making decisions about rates increases, it's always considering the impact that water increases will have on transport increases, will have on parks and reserves increases, and so all of that together can be a shift in the total amount that's acceptable to a community. So I don't know if that needs to be clearer, but I've just had it raised with me that isn't perhaps as clear as it needs to be, that one bullet point. Sharon.
Thanks, just in addition to supporting a consultation document that goes out, we've talked about having a Q&A board, similar I think to what we did with the long-term plan, so that as questions are fed in, if we could put it up onto our website so our community can see the questions that are being asked, try and make it as easy as possible, and obviously having some key messages and key bullet points to help reinforce the document as well. We want to make it as easy as possible for the community.
Cool, thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, just on that point, because obviously one way or another we're taking this out for consultation because we have to. In this period of time when the consultation is going to be open, some of our local groups aren't actually going to be having meetings in terms of residents groups, but some will, and I'm just wondering what sort of what the plan is as far as when we're going to our communities for their residents meetings and stuff like that. I would like to talk to Rolleston residents, for instance, about this. Are we just doing it through those meetings, or are we running another program as well? What's the deal?
If it doesn't fit with communities' currently existing meetings, they'll need to run extraordinary meetings to fit within the 3-week time frame. The 3 weeks is the 3 weeks, so that's where we sit. If it requires us to attend other meetings, we can do that, and if they're going to set up, if it's Rolleston residents and they're going to have a separate meeting that you can attend, I'd encourage them to do that within the submission period. Malcolm.
Yes, just contemplating on the setting the scene piece of the document. Sam, you've found the figure after the outburst by the Prime Minister last year onto what we spend on our rates, and I think it was 86% of our money is spent on roading and water from our rates. I just wondered if explain to the public how many percent of their rating dollar at the moment goes towards provision of water services. Might be something we might add to the scene setting, that was all.
Yeah, that number for us was about 85% over the next 30 years of capital spend is going to be on transport, water and wastewater. So whether we want to pull that out just for water and have the water piece in there, or it's probably the more is the emphasis on the fact that council does infrastructure spend with most of your rating money, is the emphasis I think you're after. So if we can find a way to include that in the beginning, I don't know how others around the table feel, but it's just a good reinforcement that council does infrastructure. Yeah. Did anyone else have any things around the consultation document they wanted to add or say or share? Okay, so we have adoption of it. It'll be recommended to council. It'll go on the council agenda for next week, and would welcome everyone here's support for that document at that discussion next week. If you've got any further questions that you'd like clarified, can you please ask some of the staff before that meeting, rather than raising things that bring into question the decision we've made today at the meeting, and that we authorise the Chief Executive to make any minor changes with the support of staff around the things that everyone's raised today. And we endorse the proposed process for the hearings and submissions. Mover and seconder. Malcolm, thank you. Seconder. Sophie, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you. We don't need to exclude the public. That brings us to the end of the agenda. Tim, is there anything else you wanted to say in this meeting?
No, nothing from me.
The next meeting for us is in 3 weeks' time, I think, on March the 5th in the morning, due to be an in-person meeting. I wonder, with the amount of staff and support that's required for this meeting, that we just keep the meetings in here for now rather than trying to do them next door. It just is easier. And if people need to join online, the AV's already set up. So we'll continue with this space. Therese, thank you very much. And we'll close the meeting. Una here, Tapo, ai, ko wātia. Kia ora everyone. Thanks to those online who have joined us, and Sarah, enjoy the rest of your morning. Cheers.